Hi everyone, and welcome to another piece discussion video, this time focused on the piece When We Couldn't Stop Laughing from the series ILY2. ILY2 is an 8-piece series in the postmodern body of work that explores the transcendent power of human connection to overcome the means through which it's transmitted. This is a series about hope that demonstrates how what is occurring temporarily, what is forced to connect via technology, is merely a prefigurement of a real life in-person connection waiting to eventually reconvene. For a more in-depth look at the series, you will find a link to a series overview that I published in the description of this video. Now let's focus specifically on When We Couldn't Stop Laughing, first beginning with the piece's title, as well as the relative piece order within the greater series. This is the 7th iteration of 8 in the series, so it is very much towards the end. And the title itself is suggesting a real-life moment. It's recalling a loving memory between two people in a very real sense. It calls to mind a history that the piece Our Microcosm previously in the series started to elucidate. The idea here is that When We Couldn't Stop Laughing is referring to something shared between two people. It's referring to a moment that was actually had and actually recall as something that was true and sincere. Because this is the second to last piece in the series, I also wanted it to be a sort of crescendo. There's supposed to be a sense of grandiosity, which is the reason as well why the title itself is supposed to be very phrase-like, very conversational. When we couldn't stop laughing, as though it's occurring in the midst of a conversation, in the midst of a moment. A very active title, something that is very specific, but is very moving. In line with that grandiosity, one of the first things regarding the composition of this piece that is significant is it is the first in the series to expand to a 12-inch by 12-inch dimension. Previously, we had been at 10 by 10 inches. This piece, the 7th, along with the final piece, When We Couldn't Stop Laughing and I Promise, both of these take on a 12-inch by 12-inch dimension in order to add to that sense of gravitas. The image itself takes on a sort of split screen appearance. We have both figures sharing the picture plane. It's made to resemble a video call on an application such as Skype or FaceTime. There is a very unobtrusive line of text in the upper right corner relaying the reality of the call that basically just has the timestamp on it. The bottom left corner has a text box with a message that's spilling across over the figures that reads, "And remember when we couldn't stop laughing." It's a bit of a recapitulation of the title itself, and it kind of expands on this idea that it's something the figures are recalling, or the figures are more or less recollecting. There's a simple phone icon overlaid inconspicuously on the lower right edge, and the figures are ultimately having a great deal of predominance, and they occupy almost the entirety of the picture plane. Down the center of the picture plane, however, there is a very slight line that is meant to show the split between both of them in terms of being on one camera versus another. But otherwise, the figures themselves are very fully realized and of the main focus in this piece. They are both highly detailed with a balance of hues. There's a warmth to their faces, yet a cool shadowed atmosphere, suggesting that this is an evening call or something that is taking place at night or towards the end of the day. The faces are cropped as though captured in a moment of laughter between both of them. It appears very instantaneous. The display itself and this overall resemblance of a video call, is really meant to bow to the figures. This is not meant to be something that is obtrusive or is highly noticed, but rather the figures themselves are overcoming this. Obviously, I'm already describing a lot of the ideas going into this piece just by describing some of these aspects, but I want to dive more deeply now into the conceptual aspects because, as mentioned, this piece is really about embracing an actual moment that may have taken place via technology, but was sincere and authentic between both of the figures depicted in this piece. As mentioned with the growing dimensions earlier, I wanted to have a greater sense of significance with this piece, and ultimately technology is meant to be the co-pilot here. It is not something that is forcing these two to stay contained in this moment, but rather it is a means that they're able to utilize for their benefit. The previous iteration, Our Microcosm, was what started to really describe this concept of a history, and I wanted When We Couldn't Stop Laughing to almost be a confirmation of that. not only did we have in that piece this suggestion that things had happened between these two individuals, that they had a story to tell together because of moments shared or previous interactions, but When We Couldn't Stop Laughing takes that to a further extent and exemplifies a very specific moment, and it basically confirms that yes, there is a history here, there is a story here, and there are a myriad of moments, this just being one. It connects to the idea of technology with this series and its impact, but it's again very sober, very much restrained, and very much overcome by the figures themselves, because this moment that they shared, the authenticity, the honesty, the reality, far outweighs anything else. I wanted this piece really to exemplify that moment when you're sharing something with another person over technology and you almost completely forget the technology even exists. Suddenly you're just together. Suddenly you're just within one another's space. And the technology, again, facilitates it, makes that happen. But what ultimately exists between those two people is a love, is a connection that basically transcends space and time. Regarding the way that I wanted this to be a very cool, sort of dark image in terms of the setting where we find these figures, I remarked earlier that it seems like it's at the end of the day. It's probably an evening time when they're having this call. And I wanted that to emphasize this idea that they're ending their day together, that there's a sense of finality and there's no longer an anxiety. ILY2 series started with very cold and somber sort of palettes, but that was because of an anxiety and uncertainty, whereas here we've sort of crested over that. We've overcome the fear, we've overcome the anxiety, and so now we arrive at this point where we end the day together. We can say goodnight and we can trust that something is going to come about with the next day. That is something that will be explored more deeply in the next piece, but it begins here with When We Couldn't Stop Laughing because of this cool sort of twilight atmosphere that I was hoping to evoke with the color palette. The last thing I would like to identify regarding this piece is the emotional impact. And obviously, with a piece like this, When We Couldn't Stop Laughing, there's a sense of joy that I really hope becomes the viewers. When you see these two people sort of embraced within this moment of just exuberance, of laughter, I want that joy to become the viewers. I want the viewer to be able to smile. I want this piece to immediately sort of fill you with that warmth and then become a moment of recollection for yourselves, recalling a moment when you shared that laughter with somebody else. With that joy, obviously, is a sense of steadfastness, and there's a promise here with this piece too. Again, referring back to what I was just describing with the very cold and sort of evening, end of the day sentiment that the color palette evokes here, there's this promise that is kind of made between these two people sharing this authentic moment that we can close the door on today and tomorrow will still be here for what we share. That warmth, that joy, it's meant to be something immediate with this piece, but then I want there to be a steadfastness that kind of overcomes the viewer too. We have something that is authentic and it just fills you with that sense of life that any viewer can sort of relate to and find so much solace within at the joy of human connection. I think that's really what I'm trying to stress with the emotions of this piece. It's a very active piece. It's a very bubbly piece. And it's something that I hope is incredibly energized for the viewer. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about this piece. Please share this video with anybody else who might find it worthwhile. And until the next one, take care, everybody.